Yeah, mine is a little long. I hope that we could keep it somewhat linear for you. But mine started in March of 2020. Prior to getting sick, I was an interior designer working in New York. It was my first job out of college. I've been working there for a couple months when COVID hit, and I went into lockdown with my parents, like a lot of other people did. And I kind of like went in with the idea. I was like, I went in fairly optimistic. I was like, I'm gonna learn watercolor. I'm gonna get jacked, and we're all gonna come out of this in like a month. And then New York was a really scary time in New York at the time. There were sirens. There was like a day that we had like the most sirens since 9/11. It was just like sirens all the time. Um, I had a friend who lived like around the corner from a hospital, and like she was seeing like the refrigerator trucks. It was really scary at the beginning. And then my parents both came down with it. And then I actually was, before the podcast, was going through my like messages and like photos on my phone to try to remember exactly like what date. And my COVID anniversary is actually in a couple days from now. On March 27th. I texted my friends. I'm like, I'm down with the sickness. I have it. It was really scary. I had pre-existing asthma and some neurological issues, some like migraines, that I had been diagnosed with neuralgia. So I thought it was going to be bad for me to get it because of my asthma, but I had no idea how bad it was going to be. So during my acute infection, I didn't end up going to the hospital. I was lucky to already have a pulmonologist when I got infected. I had a fever of 104.5. And my oxygen, the lowest my oxygen got was 89. I had a wonderful pulmonologist who was working at New York Presbyterian, like into all like on the floors with COVID during that first wave. And he was absolutely wonderful and kind of set the standard of like what I would expect from medical care, because he called our house every other day. He was also my mom's pulmonologist. And he was basically like, I listen, your symptoms are normally what I would tell you to go to the ER, but he said, I don't want you here. Because they were intubating people. And he said it was a really scary time. So he sent a lot of breathing medication basically to my house. And like, I had 104.5 fever. He's basically like, if it goes down with Tylenol, like, and sleep it off, and like, if it's still there in a few hours, you might have to come in. But luckily, it went down with Tylenol. I was eating like just soup and liquids for a good chunk of it. I totally lost my sense of taste and smell. Um, and I lost 20% of my body weight during my acute infection. And I just 6 years later am almost there to gaining it back. So it was very like I came out of my initial COVID infection extremely weak. And it was very clear early on, just from phone consults, because I wasn't actually seen by a doctor or able to access like a COVID test during my acute infection, that like he put me basically based on my symptoms on the phone from just recovery. I was already back on like inhaled steroids and asthma medication that I hadn't had to be on since I outgrew my asthma in like early college years. Then I think it became clear that I had effects of COVID pretty much immediately, but we didn't really know, like the word long COVID didn't really exist in the public conscious at this point. And for like those first couple months after illness, I was kind of returning back to taking my walks and trying to do my hobbies and things like that. My office, because we were like an interior design office that was working with like installing in people's homes, obviously that was not an essential service. So that was kind of put on pause. And in June of 2020 was when my pulmonologist like opened up his office to see people. And I went in there, and then at my first appointment, he did some like pulmonary function testing, and it became pretty clear like immediately that I had lung damage from my COVID infection. So it wasn't called long COVID then, but as of like 4 months after my infection, we knew that like there was problems. And then at that point, my parents had tested positive on antibody tests, and I had had two antibody tests at that point. I had no antibodies. And in retrospect, I'm really glad that I did this, but I think I was partially just traumatized by the whole experience. I was like, I really need a positive antibody test. I had no idea how the kind of barriers to care that not having proof of COVID infection would serve like for long COVID clinics. But I remember when I went to my pulmonologist's office, I heard there was like a new antibody test that was like more sensitive or whatever. And I was like, can we please just run like the new one, because I have like the two available ones. And I think he was really pitying me. He's like, listen, the newest antibody test is like the most sensitive one that we've had. Like very rarely do people test positive on this one. I don't think it's going to be positive, but he's like, I'll take your blood and we'll see. But but he was basically explaining to me that not everyone from early COVID seroconverts. And at that point, they didn't know why. But it seems to be a very common thing with like first wave long haulers. And then I was positive on that antibody test, and that allowed me to access long COVID clinics at a time that a test was a barrier to entry. So I'm really grateful for that. And also, it seems to be like a puzzle piece in some of the immune damage that it took me that long to make an antibody. So well, I think that was really long-winded. We're just 3 months into my infection. Over the next few months, I started working again. Like work kind of resumed remotely. And I was having horrible gastrointestinal symptoms, which we didn't tie to COVID at that point. It wasn't until like I want to say it was November of 2020 that I saw an article, like an NPR piece where they interviewed the head of Dysautonomia International about POTS. And I made the connection that like the heart rate symptoms that I had been having were not me, because I had gone back to like exercising and doing my yoga. And I was like, oh, it's like, how stressed am I that every time I do yoga, I feel like I'm having a panic attack. And it's POTS. So I remember like reading that article, but still, I think I wasn't really engaging so much with the patient community at that point. And I kind of regret that. I think you should be engaged with the patient community as soon as possible. But I actually found it recently. I was looking back at it. I sent the most like timid email to my migraine neurologist. I was like, I know that I'm not supposed to be like Googling my symptoms, but like, do you think maybe I have POTS? Like, here's the article. And like, here's why I think. And she was so nice. And she was like, yeah. And she like referred me to someone. And then, sorry, I just need to adjust myself because the sun is creeping up on me. There was a point in my long COVID where I couldn't like stand any light. So now that I can handle sunlight, I keep my shade open as much as possible. So I got an appointment with a POTS neurologist for March of 2021. And then in January of 2020, I was taking a walk and then I had horrible like chest pains. And I came home and I felt like I was having a heart attack or something. And my mom called her cardiologist and he squeezed me in and like like within the week. And I got my diagnosis of POTS, but I didn't get my full table until later. And that was when I think the first person that actually said the words long COVID to me was my boss. Because I had been, my work was extremely accommodating with me, working from home and my hours and stuff. But I remember I was mentioning that I was having health things and I was needing to like be at doctor's appointments and making up, the work at different times. And I think he had read an article or something about long COVID. And I said, I don't know. Because when I had brought it up to like a gastroenterologist, he kind of like hand waved it. He was like, I don't think this could be from COVID. And it was from COVID, but yeah, so that was kind of my trajectory. And then I continued declining because I think I was holding on to a real long time, like of the idea of like normalcy and the idea of like continuing to like take walks and try to like do things. Like there were all these things that I was holding on to that like I felt like as long as like I'm drinking my coffee and I'm like taking my walks and I'm like doing my job, that I'm fine. And that ended up being a really like self-destructive path for me to be on. And so I spent the first half of 2021 basically working as I am right now, like laying down in bed with like a laptop on my lap like this and like really just like hanging by a thread. And then in June of 2021, things got like significantly bad. I had like enough ER trips like during the workday that I said I need to take a month off. And then I never went back because my health continued getting bad. And then in 2021, in January, I got reinfected with Omicron, and then I got a slew of further symptoms. I have what turned out I was later diagnosed with pre-existing EDS, and then my Omicron infection caused my connective tissue to continue degrading, and now I have craniocervical instability, so I have to wear a neck brace to like sit up for extended periods of time. And yeah, it's been, to kind of sum up, I guess, the past like 5 years, because I realize I'm going on for a long time, there's been a lot of ups and downs. I've been diagnosed with MCAS, POTS, CCI, ME/CFS. I'm probably missing an acronym or two. And I'm about to see my 50th doctor. And yeah, there's been just a lot of ups and downs and dealing with medical providers and symptoms and treatments and all that stuff. But it's been a road, and also just like finding my sense of self in that.